NASCAR delivered with a host of rule changes for the 2025 season, and some familiar faces get new opportunities. Let's talk about it. Hey everyone, it's Taylor Kitchen and welcome back to Above the Yellow Line on the ATYL Media channel, where we do motorsports media your way, and on this show we talk about NASCAR all the time. Before we get into the video, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you know when we post. With all that said, let's dive into the video. Today, NASCAR released a rulebook bulletin with a slew of rule changes for the 2025 NASCAR season. I have the list in front of me here. Let's go through it. First up, NASCAR is introducing an open exemption provisional, or an OEP. This is going to be like what you see at a dirt track or a short track during the race weekends, where an all-star driver gets an automatic spot into the main event because of just their status, who they are, etc. For example, Dale Jr. at Florence Motor Speedway in the Budweiser car, regardless of how he ran in qualifying, he was going to get into the main event on the provisional. So now in NASCAR, this OEP guarantees a starting position on the grid for a world-class driver looking to enter a NASCAR Cup Series race. Of course, if an OEP is used by a driver or a team, there are things that they are not eligible for with that entry. For example, they're not eligible for playoff points, race points, prize money, or tiebreaker benefits from a finishing position. Along with this, the car of the OEP will be credited with a stage win or a race win if they win a race or win a stage. However, they will not receive playoff eligibility from those things. If an OEP entry is to win a race or win a stage, the second place driver will get those points from that. However, they will not receive playoff points or playoff eligibility from that. I've got to be honest, I was kind of surprised by the mixed reaction to this new provisional rule that NASCAR put into the rulebook. A lot of people don't like it, but I ultimately think it's overall positive. We've seen how NASCAR has benefited from having big names in the field, especially in the Cup Series. Take Shane Van Gisbergen, for instance, a supercar just legend, racing in his very first Cup Series event and winning it at the Chicago Street Race. That's big, and it was big for our sport, and it got a whole new audience invested in NASCAR. So when you have big names, world-class drivers trying to enter the Cup Series field, you're going to want to guarantee that they're going to be in the big show because it brings eyes to the sport. Speaking of all of this, let's talk about the Daytona 500 for a very quick second. We're going to talk about it way more the week of the Great American Race. But what does this mean for Elliott Castroneves, who is a world-class racer? He's going to be in the Project 91 Wendy's Chevrolet for Trackhouse. Does he get a provisional? And according to NASCAR, Trackhouse did request one and NASCAR granted it. So regardless of qualifying position, regardless of how he finishes in the duels, Elliott Castroneves is guaranteed a starting position during the Daytona 500, which positives and negatives. If he didn't make it on qualifying, I kind of wanted to see how he would do racing his way in. Nevertheless, though, I think the pros of how many eyes will bring to the sport outweigh the cons of we're not going to see Elliott Castroneves really have to fight his way into the main event. So that's a brand new rule to the rule book. Let's talk about some rules that were revised by the sanctioning body, talking about the DVP rule. Now, the changes to this rule are specific to the NASCAR Cup Series. As we know, the past few seasons, the DVP rule has been kind of up in the air, and especially last year, we saw the issues really rear their head. And a lot of the controversy or negativity around this rule in the rule book has to do with how NASCAR has applied it. It hasn't been applied evenly across the board. You think about how the DVP rule was applied to Ryan Blaney at Watkins Glen, to Josh Berry at Kansas, and then how it was applied completely differently to Chase Briscoe and Chase Elliott at Talladega in the playoffs. It was pretty unfair and uneven. So the question was, is NASCAR going to actually make some changes? And thank God they did, and I think these are pretty fair. However, along with that, the DVP rule kind of no longer exists. Let me talk about it for a second. So NASCAR now says that vehicles that are on the DVP can drive to the garage area or be towed there and not be counted out of the race. That's insane. And if they're unable to drive to pit road due to tires being down or damaged, they will be towed back to the garage area. The 7-minute or 8-minute DVP clock, 8 minutes for Atlanta, is still in effect for teams that are making repairs on pit road. But if the time expires, these teams can go back to the garage area and make the rest of their repairs, as once they're in the garage area, there is no clock for that. However, if a car leaves the pit box and the clock on the DVP expires before they reach that pit exit line, they will receive a penalty. So yeah, overall, the DVP rule is pretty much gone and completely reimagined, and I think that's for the best. I think it's better for these teams and these drivers to make the decision if they can continue or not, as opposed to a NASCAR official glancing over the car or somebody in the NASCAR tower saying, hey, they're done. That does put responsibility on these drivers and teams to make the right decision, because if they don't, it could pose a risk to not only themselves, but to the competitors around them. So there's a lot of trust that NASCAR is putting in these teams, but I think it is definitely for the better. Let's dive into the playoff waiver rule change. Think back to May when Kyle Larson had to make the choice. Do I stay in Indy to finish the 500, or do I start the Coca-Cola 600? And then we got into the whole debate if he chose to stay in Indy, and now NASCAR has to decide, does he get a waiver or not, and what's the cause and effect of that? And that led to a lot of questions. Okay, if a driver says, I want to miss a NASCAR race to go race in a really big sprint car race, does that mean I get a waiver too? Where do you draw the line? And NASCAR has definitely drawn the line. In their updated rules, NASCAR now says if a driver is granted a playoff waiver for missing a race, the driver will forfeit all current and past playoff points earned prior to the playoffs beginning, and will start the playoffs with a maximum of 2,000 points. Of course, there are exceptions to this rule that NASCAR laid out, such as medical reasons, driver health, the birth of a child. They also added in family emergency and age restriction exemptions. I adore this rule change and how it is more definitive in what is acceptable and what is not for missing a race, and the punishment from missing a race that is outside of NASCAR's exemptions that they laid out. Because if you remember when Kyle Larson announced that he was running the double again, NASCAR and Hendrick Motorsports had some back and forth funny haha banter about, yeah, we're not gonna miss the 600 again. And you kind of assumed from those comments that NASCAR was going to update their playoff waiver standards. And of course, with this, we know that they did. So I love this because NASCAR is making it clear that if you are a full-time NASCAR driver, if you are driving in one of our events, we better be the priority. They're also making it clear that if you are, let's say, suspended from a race and are given a waiver, let's say you're suspended for right rear hooking a driver, causing actions detrimental on the track, but you're given a playoff waiver, there's going to be bigger punishments for that. It's not going to be a get out of jail free card if you get the playoff waiver. You're going to have a punishment for it. So ultimately, this kind of lays down the law and it sets the expectations, and I love it. Speaking of other rule changes that I love, there is a rule change that we talked about earlier in December with practice and qualifying modifications. That video will be linked in the description if you want to learn more about those, but for the sake of time, let's move on. Because of the race at Martinsville in the fall with the OEM orders and the 100% rule and all these things, NASCAR has addressed these with rule changes. Let's start off with that performance obligation rule, the 100% rule. NASCAR has changed the verbiage around the 100% rule to really focus on the manipulation of the outcome of a race or a championship. And before I can even dive into that rule, NASCAR has now made stipulations that allow them to penalize an OEM. The rulebook now says that if an OEM violates the rules in the rulebook, it could result in the loss of OEM points, the loss of wind tunnel hours, and the loss of reduced cost facility development runs. But NASCAR did not stop there. Oh no, they did not. They also said that OEMs would be penalized for violating the testing policies, or for violating the wind tunnel or event roster policies, even the code of conduct policy, and all of these are long overdue. It baffles me that there was nothing to punish the manufacturers truly in the way that they should be for race manipulation and things like that, especially the things that we saw at Martinsville prior to this rule change. So that now NASCAR has the full range to do whatever they need to do to keep these OEMs in check, which, take that as you will, the addition of rules can be negative and positive, but ultimately we have a balance of NASCAR kind of reducing some of the rules, specifically with the DVP clock, and adding some rules where they saw some cracks or some holes in their rule book, specifically with this rule for the OEMs. So overall, I think this is a win. So I will give the sanctioning body major props. They looked at the issues that came about last year, like truly heavy issues that came about last year, and made changes accordingly that I think are ultimately fair for all parties involved. And I think a lot of these rule changes should help safeguard the championship and the legitimacy of the championship. If NASCAR is going to keep this playoff format the way it is, at least for another year or two, or however long they want to keep it, I do think these harsher penalties towards the OEM and the 100% rule and all these other things will help create a more legitimate championship, or as legitimate as possible with this format. So overall, good changes. I'm a fan of them. I think all is good. Let's shift gears to talk about some driver and team announcements, starting with a major partnership for Chase Elliott. Hendrick Motorsports announced that Amazon's Prime Video will act as a primary partner for Chase Elliott and the number 9 for 3 races annually from 2025 through 2027. This year, those races will be Talladega in April, Kansas in May, and the All-Star race in May as well. Now, when this news came out, I was expecting the exact comments that I saw, which was, Why Chase Elliott? Really, Chase Elliott? And I get it, Chase Elliott is not the most marketable driver in the sense that he's media forward. He's been very clear that he doesn't want to be out in media. He wants to kind of keep his private life private, just keep his personal time. And I totally understand that. And we talked about the, Chase Elliott issue in a video I did last year about lack of marketability and how that could hurt the sport. But ultimately, that's his choice. But with this deal with Amazon's Prime Video, NASCAR's brand new streaming partner, being on the number 9's car, that kind of forces him to be more forward in the media, which I can appreciate. Plus, if NASCAR and the fans are going to deem Chase Elliott as the most popular driver in the sport, you're going to want to put him face forward to fans that don't know a lot about NASCAR, who are wanting to learn more. If Chase Elliott is the most popular driver, that is somebody newer fans should know about. Also considering that Hendrick Motorsports is one of the biggest teams in NASCAR historically, specifically, you're going to want new fans to know about this team too. So choosing to partner with Hendrick Motorsports and Chase Elliott is a smart and reasonable decision. Now, do I think a partnership with the reigning champion Joey Logano for at least a season would have been beneficial to Amazon Prime? Yeah, but that didn't happen. And that's okay. Overall, again, I think choosing to partner with Hendrick Motorsports and Elliott is a smart move, given he is the most popular driver. Speaking of Hendrick Motorsports, let's talk about some news revolving around driver development. Hendrick Motorsports announced that they signed Corey Day, 19-year-old dirt racing extraordinaire, to a multi-year driver development deal. This deal will support him in a variety of pavement races through the 2025 season and beyond. And yes, that means that in 2025, you're going to see him in Xfinity, ARCA, Truck, what am I missing? Trans Am. You're going to see him all across the board. And after that was announced, his deal with Hendrick Motorsports, Spire Motorsports announced that they will field ARCA and Truck Series entries for him this season. He'll race in the number 77 in 7 ARCA races in 2025. And for the Truck Series, he'll race in the number 7 in 8 Truck Series races this year. Now, if you don't know who Corey Day is at this point, you're living under a rock. When I started hearing his name for the first time really last year, I started paying attention, and this kid is impressive. And I say kid, I'm almost 25 years old. He's 19. Not a huge age difference there, but to me, he's a kid. He's incredibly impressive, and he's been doing a lot of good stuff. And especially looking at his runs with Pinnacle Racing Group in ARCA East and just ARCA in general last year. In 4 starts, he earned 2 top 10s and 1 top 5, which overall, pretty good. It's really good to see Hendrick Motorsports supporting young drivers as they go through the ranks, and hopefully maybe 6-10 years from now, you're going to see these drivers that they're starting a development relationship with go into the Cup Series in their program or in an affiliate program. They have a really close relationship with Spire, as we've seen. Maybe we'll see Corey Day years from now in a Cup Series car at Spire. Who knows? But what Hendrick Motorsports is doing right now with developing these drivers is super smart. You love to see it, and Corey Day, I think, is a great addition to their development program. The conversations today, I feel, are very Chevrolet heavy, but we're going to get to our final piece of news with Trackhouse Racing. They announced that Shane Van Gisbergen and Ross Chastain are going to race in 9 Xfinity Series races with Junior Motorsports in the number 9 entry. Of those 9 races, Ross Chastain will run 5 of those at Circuit of the Americas, then Darlington, Nashville, Dover, and then Iowa. And SVG will run 4 of those 9 races, starting at Mexico City, then at Chicago, Sonoma, and Watkins Glen. So all of those road course races where you're kind of guaranteed for him to at least win half of those. This is a very, very, very smart move on the part of Junior Motorsports and Trackhouse Racing, considering a Trackhouse development driver in Connor Zilic is in his first full-time year in the Xfinity Series. So racing with veteran drivers that are technically his teammates with Trackhouse in their program, having them give him data, pointers, information is huge. And I could say the same thing for SVG. The more seat time that he gets, the better, considering that this is his first full-time season in the Cup Series at Trackhouse, racing in the number 88. Plus, we're seeing Trackhouse and Junior Motorsports work more closely together in the future, which I think is very interesting and something I really like to see. So overall, a positive. I think this is good. I do wish, though, we could have seen SVG have some more oval races in his slate for the Xfinity Series, given that that's where he needs more work. Regardless, I think this is awesome. So what did you think of the rulebook changes and all of this NASCAR news? Let me know in the comments below. Of course, make sure to go to AboveTheYellowLine.com to learn more about what we do, our coverage, and our content team. And before you go, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, share this with your friends and family, and until next time, I'll see ya. Bye.